My name is Staff Sergeant James Mercer, 42, from Wilmington, North Carolina. Former Marine Corps infantryman with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. This is my tragic recount of what happened in Iraq in 2004. The sound never leaves you. Not the explosions, those fade. It's the silence after. 23 seconds of absolute nothing while my eardrums recovered. And in that silence, I watched my best friend's mouth moving, screaming something I couldn't hear. How did a routine patrol turn into the bloodiest day of his deployment? Subscribe to our channel for more raw, unfiltered accounts from the men and women who've served on the front lines. I was 20 when I landed in Iraq. Before that, I was bagging groceries at the Food Lion in Wilmington, North Carolina, living in my mom's basement and trying to figure out what to do with my life. September 11th happened my senior year of high school. I remember sitting in Ms. Keller's history class watching the second tower fall. No one said anything for what felt like hours. I didn't enlist right away. Truth is, I was scared. My dad had been in Vietnam 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. The Walking Dead, they called them. He didn't talk about it much, but sometimes, late at night, I'd find him sitting on the back porch, smoking cigarettes he wasn't supposed to have, staring at nothing. When I told him I was thinking about enlisting, he just nodded once, said, "You'll come back different." That was it. No lecture, no pride, no disappointment. Just a fact. Mom was different. She cried for 3 days straight when I signed the papers, made me promise things no one can promise in war. I think she knew what was coming before I did. I'd been dating this girl, Sarah, for about 8 months when I enlisted. She said she'd wait for me. They all say that. I believed her because I needed to. We took photos together the night before I left for basic. Her perfume stayed on my jacket for weeks. I kept that photo in my helmet the whole time I was in Iraq, right up until the day in the valley when I lost it. The recruiting office was in a strip mall between a Subway and a nail salon. Staff Sergeant Daniels had a firm handshake and a rehearsed speech about honor and duty. He didn't lie to me, exactly, just emphasized certain truths while minimizing others. I scored well on the ASVAB, could have gone into intelligence or communications, but something in me wanted infantry, needed it, maybe, like I had to prove something. Infantry is the heart of the corps, Daniel said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. Every Marine's a rifleman first, but you'll be a rifleman always. I signed my name on a Tuesday morning. It was raining, the same kind of steady, soaking rain that would fall the day we buried Benji Foster 2 years later. I remember walking out of that strip mall feeling different, lighter somehow, like I'd put down something I'd been carrying. Or maybe I'd just picked up something I couldn't yet feel the weight of. I called my dad from the parking lot. "I did it," I said when he answered. A long pause, the sound of him lighting a cigarette. "All right then," he said finally. "Come on home. Your mother's making pot roast." That night at dinner, nobody mentioned the Marines. We talked about the weather, about my cousin's new baby, about the leak in the garage roof. Normal things, safe things. But there was something in the air between us, something unsaid that filled the room like smoke. After dinner, Dad and I sat on the back porch. The same porch where he'd sit alone in the dark all those nights when I was growing up. "You know why they called us the Walking Dead?" he asked suddenly. I shook my head. Highest casualty rate in Marine Corps history. 1 in 3 didn't come home. He took a long drag of his cigarette. "I never told you this, but I was the radio man for my platoon. Like having a target on your back, the enemy always goes for the radio guy first." He stubbed out his cigarette, lit another one immediately. "When you're over there, you keep your head down. You listen to your NCOs, and you remember that the guy next to you is fighting for his life just like you are." He looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time since I was a kid. The corps will teach you how to kill. Nobody teaches you how to live with it after. 2 weeks later, I was on a bus to Paris Island. I didn't know then what waited for me on the other side of the world. Didn't know about Fallujah or the valley, or those 23 seconds of silence. Didn't know about Benji Foster or the weight of carrying a dead friend. Didn't know my father was right about coming back different. Basic training at Paris Island was exactly what they tell you, hell, disguised as purpose. I wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but I was good at shutting my brain off, at following orders without thinking too much. That's a skill they don't tell you about in the recruitment office. The ability to become something else, someone who moves and acts without the burden of constant decision-making. By the time I graduated, I could field strip my M16 blindfolded, recite the Marine Corps' entire history, and run 5 miles without feeling like death. I thought I was ready. They break you down methodically at Paris Island. It's not random cruelty, though it feels that way when you're in it. There's a science to it. First, they strip away your identity, your clothes, your hair, your name. You become a recruit, a number, part of a collective that moves and breathes as one organism. The drill instructors were like forces of nature. Staff Sergeant Ramos could make a whisper sound like a thunderclap. He never seemed asleep. No matter what time it was, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., he was there. Perfectly pressed uniform, eyes that missed nothing. Reynolds, he'd bark. Your rack looks like a tornado. Hit it. Drop and give me 50. And I'd drop because that's what you do. You don't question, you don't hesitate. The moment between command and action disappears. There were 73 of us when we started. 64 made it to graduation. The others were dropped for medical reasons, or performance, or because they simply broke. There's no shame in breaking. Paris Island is designed to find your breaking point. My bunkmate was a farm kid from Iowa named Schultz, 6'4", built like a linebacker, cried himself to sleep every night for the first week. By the 3rd week, he was leading cadence on our runs. By graduation, he had transformed completely, shoulders back, eyes forward, moving with the kind of confidence that can't be faked. They don't just train us to fight, he told me one night during fire watch. They train us to win. There's a difference. The physical transformation was the most obvious. I lost 20 pounds of fat, gained 15 of muscle. My body became a tool, something to be maintained and utilized rather than just inhabited. But the mental shift was more profound. I learned to compartmentalize fear, to function despite it, even to use it. Family Day came 2 days before graduation. Mom didn't recognize me at first. She stood 10 feet away, scanning the crowd of identical uniforms and high-end tight haircuts. "Jack," she finally said, her voice small and uncertain. Dad just nodded when he saw me, something like recognition. In his eyes, not of me, exactly, but of what I'd become. What he'd been once. "You look good, son," he said, and I knew it was the highest praise he could give. Graduation day was blistering hot, the kind of South Carolina heat that feels like a physical weight. We stood at attention in our dress blues while the band played and the colors were presented. I caught sight of Ramos watching us from the sidelines. For the first time, I saw something like pride in his face. Later, as we were gathering our gear, he pulled me aside. "Reynolds, you weren't the worst recruit I've ever had." I grinned. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Don't thank me yet. The real test isn't here." His eyes hardened. "It's out there." 2 weeks after graduation, I received my orders. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, deploying to Iraq in January. I had 6 weeks of leave before I needed to report to Camp Pendleton. I spent those weeks trying to remember how to be a civilian, how to sleep past 5 a.m., how to walk without marching, how to have conversations that weren't punctuated by yes, sir, and no, sir. Sarah and I broke up 3 weeks into my leave. She said I was different, distant. She wasn't wrong. "It's like, you're here, but you're not really here," she said, tears making her mascara run. "Like part of you is already over there." I didn't argue, couldn't, because she was right. Part of me was already in Iraq, already fighting a war I couldn't yet imagine. My body was in Wilmington, sitting on a beach with a girl I'd known since high school. But my mind was elsewhere, preparing for something I couldn't name. The night before I left for Pendleton, Dad and I sat on the porch again. "I'm proud of you," he said, the words sounding rusty, unused. "But I'm scared for you too." "I'll be fine, Dad." He looked at me for a long moment. "You don't know that. Nobody knows. That I've been trained. So was I." He cut me off. So was every guy who came home in a box. We sat in silence after that, listening to the cicadas and the distant sound of thunder. There was nothing else to say, really. We both knew what waited, across the ocean. The only difference was, he'd already seen it. I was still blind. When I boarded the plane the next morning, I felt ready, prepared, confident in my training and in myself. I had no idea how wrong I was. No idea what waited for me in the dust and heat of Iraq. No idea that I was flying toward the moment that would divide my life into before and after, a narrow valley outside Fallujah, and 23 seconds of silence that would change everything. My unit was the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, the Dark Horse Battalion. We deployed in January 2004, right after Christmas. I remember the flight over 18 hours of cramped seats and nervous silence, punctuated by strange jokes that no one really laughed at. Guys writing letters they'd never sent. Others sleeping like they knew it might be their last chance for a while. The heat hit us first when we landed. Even in January, Iraq felt like standing in front of an open oven. The air was thick with dust that coated your throat, your eyes, the inside of your nose. Everything was brown: the sky, the ground, the buildings, even the water in the bottles. They handed us seemed to have a brownish tint. We landed at night on a C-17, a massive cargo plane that seemed to swallow our entire company. The loadmaster had warned us about the landing: a steep, corkscrew descent to avoid potential ground fire. Combat landings, they called them. The plane dropped so suddenly my stomach lurched into my throat. The guy next to me, a lance corporal, named Erickson, threw up into a plastic bag. When the ramp lowered, the heat slapped us in the face like a physical thing. Despite the hour just past, midnight hit had to be 90 degrees. We filed out in full gear, each of us carrying at least 80 pounds of equipment. My boots hit the tarmac and immediately sank into what felt like hot sand. The air smelled of jet fuel, sweat, and something else I couldn't place a burnt, metallic odor that I would later recognize as the smell of war itself. Welcome to the sandbox. Someone muttered behind me. A group of Marines who were rotating home passed us on their way to the plane. They looked older than their years, faces weathered and eyes hollow. They didn't speak to us. Didn't need to. Their expressions said everything. You have no idea what you're walking into. They stationed us at Camp Fallujah, about 40 miles west of Baghdad. The base was a strange mix of temporary and permanent concrete barriers and sandbags, alongside air-conditioned trailers and satellite dishes. Some guys from the unit we were replacing gave us the rundown. Where to shower, where to eat, which roads not to take unless you wanted to get blown up. The locals called this place the City of Mosques. One of them told us, a sergeant with a 1,000-yard stare. You'll hear the call to prayer 5 times a day. First one's at dawn. That's usually when they start shooting. Our living quarters were plywood huts with canvas roofs, 8 men to a room barely big enough for 4. I claimed a bottom bunk by the door, dropped my gear, and sat on the thin mattress. The reality of where I was, what I was doing, began to sink in. This wasn't a training exercise. This was war. That first night, I couldn't sleep. None of us could. The air was too hot, the cots too narrow, the sounds too alien. Distant explosions punctuated the darkness. Occasionally, tracer rounds would arc across the sky like deadly shooting stars. Is that incoming or outgoing? Someone whispered. If you have to ask, it's outgoing, another voice answered. Trust me, you'll know when it's incoming. At dawn, just as the sergeant had predicted, the call to prayer echoed across the city, a haunting, melodic sound that filled the air and seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was beautiful in a way I wasn't prepared for. And just as the last notes faded, the shooting started. Sporadic at first, single shots, then short bursts of automatic fire. Welcome to Fallujah. The next few days were a blur of briefings, equipment checks, and perimeter patrols. We learned the layout of the base, the protocols for moving outside, the wire, the radio procedures. They showed us photos of high-value targets, taught us basic Arabic phrases, warned us about the constantly evolving tactics of the insurgents. They're adaptive, our intelligence officer explained. What worked yesterday might get you killed tomorrow. Stay alert, stay unpredictable. On our third day, a mortar round landed in the base, about 100 yards from our hut. The explosion sent us diving for cover, more instinct than training. When the dust settled, we learned it had wounded 2 Marines from another company and killed a local interpreter. That night, I wrote my first letter home. I told my parents about the flight, the heat, the food in the chow hall. I didn't mention the mortar attack or the body bag I'd seen being loaded onto a helicopter, or the knot of fear that had taken up permanent residence in my stomach. I ended the letter with a lie. Everything's fine. Don't worry about me. As I sealed the envelope, I wondered if my father had written the same lies home from Vietnam. If this, too, was part of the unspoken tradition passed from one generation of warriors to the next, the protective fiction that war is somehow manageable, comprehensible, anything other than what it truly is, chaos given form and purpose. The truth was, nothing was fine. But admitting that meant acknowledging the yawning abyss between the person I had been and the person I was becoming. It meant recognizing that with each passing day, each patrol, each distant explosion, I was moving further from home in ways that had nothing to do with physical distance. I wasn't ready for that truth. Not yet. It would take a narrow valley and 23 seconds of silence to make me face it. Staff Sergeant William Matthews was our squad leader. He'd already done 1 tour in Afghanistan, had a Purple Heart and a wife back home who was 7 months pregnant. He kept a sonogram picture taped inside his helmet. A ritual he'd tap it twice before we went outside the wire. For luck, he'd say, but we all knew it was more than that. It was a reminder that something existed beyond the endless brown and the constant waiting. Matthews was old for a staff sergeant, 32 with crow's feet around his eyes and a receding hairline he tried to hide with high and tight haircuts. He'd been a drill instructor at Paris Island before volunteering for combat duty again. "Why'd you come back?" I asked him once. "You could have stayed stateside, especially with the baby coming." He was cleaning his rifle, hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who'd performed the same task thousands of times. "Because you idiots need someone to keep you alive," he said without looking up. Then, after a pause, "and because this is where I belong." Our squad was 12 guys. Timothy "Tim" Parker was our radio man, always had a pack of cards, and knew every country song ever written. He was from Tennessee, had a slow drawl that got thicker when he was tired or scared. The radio he carried weighed 26 pounds, not counting the spare batteries. Add that to his regular gear, and he was humping well over 100 pounds on every patrol. Never complained, though Benji Foster, was barely 19, still had acne and a high-pitched laugh that didn't match his 6'3" frame. He was our driver, had a natural instinct for vehicles that bordered on supernatural, could fix anything with an engine using nothing but spare parts and profanity. Kept a photo of his high school girlfriend taped to his rifle stock. They'd broken up before he deployed, but he kept the picture anyway. For motivation, he'd say with a grin that never quite reached his eyes. Danny Mitchell was our saw gunner. Quiet until he wasn't, then you couldn't shut him up. The squad automatic weapon weighed 22 pounds, fully loaded, and Mitchell treated it like a beloved pet, talking to it, naming it Bertha. He was built like a fire plug, 5-footed and solid muscle. Could carry the sob for days without slowing down. Nate Collins was my best friend there. We had the same taste in music, both played guitar. We'd stay up late talking about starting a band when we got back. Collins had been a music major at UCLA before enlisting, could play anything with strings. Sometimes, on quiet nights, he'd bring out a battered acoustic guitar he'd bought from a local vendor and play for hours, everything from classical to metallic. His fingers were calloused from both guitar strings and rifle triggers. Samuel Doc Harris was our corpsman Navy, technically, but more Marine than most Marines. Carried twice the medical supplies regulations required, which saved more than one life. Had a wife and twin daughters back in San Diego. Showed their pictures to anyone who'd looked, talked about them constantly. My girls, he'd call them, including his wife in that category. He had the steadiest hands I've ever seen, could start an IV in the dark, in a moving vehicle, while under fire. Then there was James Jimmy Wilson, Robert Bobby Lee, Thomas Tommy Clark, Andrew Andy Wright, and Michael Mike Harrison. We became something closer than family. Wilson was our point man, always on alert, almost preternaturally aware of his surroundings. He'd grown up hunting in the Appalachian Mountains, could spot movement at distances that seemed impossible. Lee was our designated marksman, quiet and precise in everything he did. Clark was the joker, always ready with a smart-ass comment or a prank to break the tension. Wright was the intellectual, had 2 years of college before enlisting, read philosophy books during downtime. Harrison was the oldest besides Matthews, 28 and on his second tour. We lived together, ate together, patrolled together, learned each other's habits, quirks, fears, the kind of intimate knowledge that only comes from proximity and shared danger. I knew that Parker talked in his sleep, that Foster couldn't eat eggs without gagging, that Mitchell had a recurring nightmare about drowning. They knew that I wrote in a journal every night, that I couldn't stand the smell of the local cigarettes, that I sleepwalked when I was especially tired. The daily routine shaped us. Wake up at 05:00 PT, breakfast, equipment check, briefing, patrol or perimeter duty, maintenance, chow, more patrols or training, downtime if you were lucky, sleep if you could. Repeat. The sameness of it was both comforting and maddening. We coped in different ways. Parker played cards obsessively, could shuffle a deck with one hand. Foster worked on vehicles, even when he was off duty, always tinkering, improving, fixing. Mitchell cleaned his saw, took it apart, and reassembled it multiple times a day. Collins played guitar or wrote letters home. Harris organized his medical supplies by category, then reorganized them by frequency of use, then started over. Wilson whittled small animals from pieces of wood he found. Lee read the same dog-eared Tom Clancy novel over and over. Clark told jokes. Wright read. Harrison just watched, observing everything, saying little dot at night. When the heat finally broke and the stars came out, Collins and I would sit on the roof of our hut with his guitar, talking about the band we'd start when we got back home. "Well, need a drummer?" he'd say, strumming quietly, "and a bass player." "Mitchell on drums?" I'd suggest. "He's already got the rhythm with the saw." "Good call. Foster on bass." "What about the name?" Collins would think for a moment, fingers never stopping. "Their movement across the strings, 23 seconds. Why that? I don't know. Just sounds right." We didn't know then how prophetic that name would be. Didn't know about the valley, or the ambush, or the silence that would follow the explosion. Didn't know that Foster would never make it home to play bass in our imaginary band. "What kind of music will we play?" I asked. "Whatever we want," Collins said. "That's the beauty of it. No rules, no orders, no staff sergeants telling us what to do. Just music." It was a fantasy, of course, a way to imagine a future beyond the dust and heat and constant threat of death, a way to believe that we would all make it home, that there was something waiting for us on the other side of this deployment. "We should write a song about this place," I said. "Not the fighting, but the other stuff. The way the stars look at night, the call to prayer, the kids in the market." Collins nodded, his face thoughtful in the starlight. "Yeah, not a war song, just a song about being here, being us." "Think anyone would listen to it?" "Probably not," he grinned. "But we'd play it anyway." That was 2 weeks before the valley. 2 weeks before everything changed. 2 weeks before I learned that some songs never get written, some bands never form, some promises can't be kept. 2 weeks before, 23 seconds of silence taught me what my father had tried to tell me on our back porch in Wilmington. You'll come back different. The first month was mostly patrols, checkpoints, and the occasional raid on a suspected insurgent safe house. Boring stretches punctuated by moments of absolute terror. We'd drive through markets where kids would run alongside our Humvees, waving and asking for candy or soccer balls. Some of the older men would nod respectfully. Others would stare with eyes that made it clear we weren't welcome. I fired my weapon. For the first time on February 12th, We were escorting a supply convoy when an IED hit the lead vehicle. Then small arms fire erupted from a nearby cluster of buildings. I remember Matthews shouting for us to establish a perimeter to return fire. I remember the weight of my rifle against my shoulder, the smell of gunpowder, the way time seemed to both slow down and speed up simultaneously. That morning had started like any other. Wake up at 0500. Gear check. Briefing on the convoy route. 3 Humvees, 12 Marines, escorting 2 supply trucks from Camp Fallujah to a forward operating base about 30 miles north. Routine mission, low risk, according to intelligence. Foster was driving our Humvee, middle in the formation. Collins rode shotgun, me in the back with Mitchell and his saw. Matthews was in the lead vehicle with Parker, Wilson, and Lee. Wright, Harris, Harrison, and Clark brought up the rear. The first hour was uneventful. We passed through 2 checkpoints, waved at some kids playing soccer in a dusty lot, noted the usual morning activities in the villages we drove through. Normal.com, the kind of mission that makes you let your guard down, just a little. We were about 5 miles from the fob when it happened. The lead Humvee was crossing an intersection when the IED detonated. Not a massive explosion, these weren't the sophisticated devices that would come later in the war, just enough to disable the vehicle and create confusion. I remember the sound. Sharp crack followed by the clatter of debris hitting our windshield. Foster instinctively swerved, braking hard. Collins was on the radio immediately. Contact, IED, grid square, Eco 59er, lead vehicle hit. Then the shooting started. First just a few rounds, then a steady barrage from the buildings to our right. The distinctive crack of AK-47s, the whine of bullets passing too close. Matthews' voice came over the radio, remarkably calm. Disembark and establish a perimeter. Return fire, identify targets. Parker, call in our situation. We bailed out of the Humvee, taking cover behind it. Mitchell set up his saw on the hood, began laying down suppressing fire toward the buildings. Collins and I spread out, trying to spot muzzle flashes, any indication of where the shooters were. I remember the absolute clarity of that moment. No fear, no hesitation, just a series of actions performed exactly as we'd trained. Get cover, identify targets, return fire, support your team. I saw movement in a second-floor window, just a shadow, a shape. I aimed and fired a 3-round burst. The M16 bucked against my shoulder, the sound deafening even through my ear protection. I don't know if I hit anything. Don't know if I killed someone. I never wanted to know. The firefight lasted maybe 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. The insurgents melted away as soon as our air support arrived. 2 Cobra helicopters that roared overhead, firing at the buildings, sending up plumes of dust and debris. When it was over, we had 1 wounded Harrison, took some shrapnel to his leg, nothing life-threatening. The insurgents had disappeared back into the city. We transferred the supplies to our remaining vehicles, rigged the damaged Humvee for towing, and completed the mission. That night, no one talked much. I sat on my cot cleaning my rifle, over and over, until Harris came by and told me to get some sleep. First time's the hardest, he said. But I wasn't sure if he meant the first firefight or the first time you might have taken a life. I didn't ask. I couldn't sleep. Kept replaying the moment in my head, the shape in the window, the pressure of my finger on the trigger, the recoil. 3 shots. Had they hit? Had I killed someone, a fighter, a civilian? There was no way to know. Around midnight, Collins found me sitting outside, staring at nothing. You good? He asked, dropping down beside me. Yeah, fine, bullshit. He nudged my shoulder with his. It's okay not to be fine, you know? I looked at him, this guy I'd known for only a few months, who somehow knew exactly what was going through my head. I keep thinking about whoever was in that window, I admitted. Collins nodded. Me too. I put at least 5 rounds into that building. How do you deal with it? He was quiet for a long moment. I tell myself it was them or us, and I remind myself that I didn't start this fight. Does that help? Sometimes. He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. Other times I just play guitar, until I can't think about it anymore. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the base at night generators, humming, occasional vehicles passing, the murmur of other Marines talking in low voices. My dad tried to warn me, I said finally, about what it would be like. I didn't really listen. None of us did, Collins replied. How could we? You can't understand this until you're in it. The next day, we were back on patrol, as if nothing had happened. That's how it works in war. The extraordinary quickly becomes routine. By the end of February, we'd been in half a dozen firefights. By mid-March, I'd stopped counting. Each engagement followed a similar pattern, ED or small arms. Fire, our response, the enemy fading away before we could effectively engage. Hit and run, asymmetric warfare at its most basic. We had the technology, the training, the air support. They had the home field advantage and the luxury of choosing when and where to fight. We adapted, learned to spot the signs of an impending attack. Streets suddenly empty of civilians, unusual objects on the roadside. The tense silence that often preceded violence. We became hyper-aware, constantly scanning rooftops, alleyways, abandoned vehicles. Every piece of trash could be an IED, every civilian could be an insurgent. Every routine patrol could turn deadly in an instant. The constant vigilance wore on us. You can only maintain that level of alertness for so long before it starts to affect you. We all developed coping mechanisms. Foster became even more obsessive about vehicle maintenance. Mitchell talked to his saw more, full conversations sometimes. Wright read his philosophy books with increasing intensity, as if they might contain answers to the madness around us. Harrison grew quieter, more withdrawn. Matthews checked the sonogram in his helmet more frequently. Collins played guitar less. That was the change that worried me most. The music had been his refuge, his connection to the person he'd been before Iraq. Without it, he seemed harder, more distant. Why don't you play anymore? I asked him one night. He shrugged. Don't feel like it. The band won't work if our lead guitarist quits. A flash of the old Collins in his smile. The band was always bullshit, jack of fantasy. Doesn't mean it's not important. He picked up the guitar, strummed a few chords, then set it down again. I'll play when we get home. When it means something again. I didn't press him. Understood in some way that this was part of his armor, his way of compartmentalizing. The music belonged to another life, another version of himself. Here, now, he needed to be someone else, someone harder, someone capable of doing what needed to be done without breaking. We were all becoming those people. Day by day, patrol by patrol, firefight by firefight, shedding our civilian selves like snakes, shedding skin, becoming what the Corps needed us to be, what we needed to be to survive. None of us realized that the real test was still coming, that all these smaller engagements were just preparation for the valley. For 23 seconds of silence that would change everything. Days bled into weeks. We settled into routines, patrols, maintenance, meals, sleep when you could get it. We learned to recognize the difference between distant gunfire and nearby explosions, between the harmless backfire of a civilian vehicle and something more sinister. We became hyper-aware, constantly scanning rooftops, alleyways, abandoned vehicles. Civilian casualties mounted. So did military ones. We attended to many memorial services. Time works differently in war. Days stretch endlessly, yet weeks disappear. In a blur. By late March, I couldn't remember what day it was without checking my watch. The only real markers were missions and incidents. The day Wilson shot that sniper. The night we raided the weapons cache. The morning Harrison got his $1 million wound, not serious enough to die, just enough to go home. The worst part wasn't the fighting, it was the waiting. Hours of boredom punctuated by moments of terror. The constant tension of anticipating the next attack, the next IED, the next bad decision from someone higher up the chain of command. We found ways to pass the time. Card games, working out with makeshift equipment, writing letters home full of sanitized half-truths. No one wanted to worry their families, so we wrote about the food, the weather, the funny things other Marines said or did. We didn't write about the bodies, the explosions, the way fear tastes like metal in your mouth. Sleep became precious, elusive. Even when we had time for it, true rest was rare. Nightmares plagued us all. I dreamed of drowning in sand, of running through endless brown streets while unseen enemies watched from every window. I'd wake gasping, heart pounding, hand already reaching for my rifle. We missed a memorial service for a Marine from another company someone Matthews had known from his time at Paris Island. We were on patrol when they held it. When we returned, the empty boots, rifle, and helmet were still there at the front of the room. The Marine's dog tags hung from the rifle, occasionally clinking against the barrel when the air conditioning kicked on. That sound haunted me for days. Foster started talking about his plans for after deployment. He'd go back to school, study, engineering. I'm going to design better vehicles, he'd say. Ones that can withstand these IEDs. Mitchell named his saw Bertha and had conversations with it when he thought no one was listening. Collins played his guitar less and less. The locals watched us with eyes that had seen too many armies come and go. Children still ran after our Humvees, asking for candy or pens or anything we might give them. But there was wariness now, a recognition that friendship with us could mark them for death after we left there. Neighborhood rumors circulated about increased insurgent activity outside the city. Intelligence reports mentioned weapons being moved, fighters gathering. Matthews didn't share much, but his face grew more serious during briefings. He tapped the sonogram in his helmet more frequently before missions. "Something's coming, Collins," said one night as we lay on our cots, staring at the ceiling. "You can feel it." I knew what he meant. There was a tension in the air, a coiling of forces beyond our control, like the pressure before a thunderstorm, building toward inevitable release. "Whatever it is," I said, "we'll handle it." Neither of us believed it, but saying it out loud was its own kind of prayer. April 4th was supposed to be a standard patrol. Intel had reported increased insurgent activity in a valley about 20 miles outside the city, a supply route they thought was being used to move weapons. Our mission was simple: go in, check it out, report back. 3 squads, 36 Marines. In total, split between 5 Humvees. The briefing was at 0400. The operations tent lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look sickly. Lieutenant Garcia stood at the front, pointing to a map projected on the wall. "This valley connects these 2 areas where we've seen increased movement," he said, tracing a finger along a narrow passage between 2 ridgelines. "Intelligence suggests it's being used to transport weapons and fighters." I studied the map, feeling uneasy. The valley was narrow, with steep, rocky hills on either side, a perfect spot for an ambush. I glanced at Matthews, saw the same thought reflected in his eyes. Rules of engagement remain the same, Garcia continued. "We are observers first, fighters second. Do not fire unless fired upon. We want intelligence more than conflict." Matthews raised a hand. "Sir, that terrain looks problematic. Limited maneuverability, high ground on both sides." Garcia nodded. "Noted, Staff Sergeant, but satellite shows minimal coverage on those ridgelines. Not much in the way of hiding spots." "Satellites can't see everything, sir." A flicker of annoyance crossed Garcia's face. "Your concerns are noted, but this mission has been approved up the chain. We move out at 0600. After the briefing, our squad gathered by the Humvees. No one said what we were all thinking. The valley was a death trap. "Check your gear twice," Matthews said. "Full combat loads, extra water, comes check every 15 minutes once we're moving." Parker adjusted the radio on his back. "Staff Sergeant, what's your gut telling you?" Matthews looked toward the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was starting to lighten the sky. "My gut's telling me to make sure you keep that radio working, Parker." We spent the next hour preparing. I cleaned my rifle again, though it was already spotless. Foster checked every inch of our Humvee, testing systems, adjusting mirrors. Mitchell loaded and reloaded his saw, whispering to it too quietly for me to hear. Collins sat next to me, methodically organizing the magazines in his pouches. "You write home last night?" he asked. "Yeah, you started too." "Couldn't finish it." He looked up at me. Felt wrong somehow. I knew what he meant. Riding home before a mission that felt dangerous was like tempting fate. Harrison approached, his limp barely noticeable now. "Hey Reynolds, got something for you." He handed me a small metal charm, a St. Michael medallion, for protection. "My mom sent me 3. Figured you could use one." "Thanks, Mike. I'm not really religious, though." He shrugged. "Neither am I. But it can't hurt, right?" At 0545, we gathered for a final briefing. Matthews looked each of us in the eye as he spoke. "Stay alert, stay together. This is a straight reconnaissance. We see something, we report it. We don't engage unless necessary." He paused, then tapped the side of his helmet where the sonogram was taped. "Everyone comes home today." "That's an order." We mounted up at 0600, Foster behind the wheel of our Humvee, me in the passenger seat, Collins, Mitchell, and Harrison in the back. The sun was just cresting the horizon as we rolled through the gate. A convoy of 5 vehicles heading into the unknown. None of us knew that only 3 would. Return. None of us knew about the 23 seconds of silence waiting in that valley. None of us knew that, by sunset, some of the men sitting in those Humvees would be nothing but names on a memorial wall and memories that would haunt the rest of us forever. We left before dawn. The valley was narrow, with steep, rocky hills on either side perfect for an ambush, which we all recognized but no one said out loud. Foster was driving our Humvee. I was in the passenger seat, scanning the ridgeline through my rifle scope. Collins, Mitchell, and Harrison were in the back. "Got a bad feeling about this one," Mitchell said as we entered the valley. It was the kind of thing someone always said before a patrol. Usually, nothing happened. The convoy moved slowly, maintaining careful intervals between vehicles. Matthews was in the lead Humvee with Parker, Wilson, and Lee. We were second. Wright, Harris, and Clark were in the third. The other 2 squads followed in the remaining vehicles. The valley floor was hard-packed dirt with occasional scrubby vegetation. The ridge lines rose sharply on both sides, rocky and barren except for scattered boulders and stunted trees. Perfect cover for anyone wanting to observe or ambush. I swept my sector methodically, looking for any sign of movement, any flash of metal or unnatural shape among the rocks. The morning sun cast long shadows that made the task more difficult, creating dark patches where fighters could easily hide. "See anything?" Foster asked, eyes fixed on the rutted path ahead. "Nothing yet. Too many shadows." The radio crackled with routine check-ins. Each vehicle reporting status, each team confirming their sector was clear. The normalcy was almost reassuring. Almost. We were about halfway through the valley when I noticed something odd. "Where are the birds?" Collins leaned forward from the back seat. "What, birds? Animals? There's nothing moving out there." He frowned, scanning the ridgeline. Could just be the time of day. Maybe, but I didn't believe it. In my experience, absence of wildlife meant human presence. Animals noticed things we missed, fled before we realized there was danger. "Matthews," I said into the squad radio. "This is Reynolds. Something feels off. No wildlife anywhere." "Roger that," came the reply. "We've noticed the same. Stay alert." The convoy continued forward, tension mounting with each passing minute. The valley narrowed further, the walls pressing in on both sides. Our maneuverability, already limited, was now almost non-existent. We were committed to this path, this direction. 2 clicks to the exit, Foster said, checking the GPS. Almost there. Mitchell shifted his saw, aiming it toward the northern ridge. Movement, 2 o'clock high. I swung my rifle toward the spot. I don't see anything. There was something. Just for a second. We relayed the possible sighting to Matthews. He ordered increased vigilance, but kept us moving. No confirmation meant no change of plans. The radio chatter decreased as everyone focused on their sectors. The only sounds were the rumble of engines and the crunch of tires on dirt. Even our breathing seemed too loud in the tense silence. That's when I saw a brief glint of metal on the southern ridge, the unmistakable silhouette of an RPG launcher. "Contact right," I shouted into the radio. RPG on the high ground. But the warning came too late. The world exploded into chaos. The RPG streaked down from the ridge, a bright trail against the morning sky. It struck the lead Humvee with devastating precision, hitting just behind the driver's compartment. The explosion lifted the 7,000-pound vehicle like it was made of paper. I remember seeing it almost in slow motion, the initial impact, the flash of light, the way it rolled once, twice, before coming to rest on its side. Then everything happened at once. Gunfire erupted from both ridgelines. We were caught in a crossfire, pinned down in the middle of the valley with nowhere to go. Foster swerved hard, taking us off the dirt road and behind a large boulder that offered some cover. The radio exploded with voices, everyone shouting at once, trying to coordinate a response. Contact left. Contact left. I need suppressing. Fire on that ridgeline. We've got wounded in Vehicle 1. Staff Sergeant Matthews' voice cut through the chaos. Parker, call in our position. I need air support now. Everyone else, establish a perimeter and return fire. We bailed out of the Humvee, taking cover behind it and the boulder. Mitchell set up his saw on the hood, beginning to lay down suppressing fire toward the northern ridge. The distinctive thump-thump of the weapon seemed to shake the very air. I took position at the front wheel, trying to locate targets on the southern ridge. Collins crouched beside me, firing in controlled bursts like we'd been trained. I count at least 15 on the eastern ridge, he shouted over the gunfire. Maybe more. We were outmanned and outpositioned. The insurgents had the high ground on both sides. They could see everything we did. While we were shooting at Shadow's dot, an explosion hit about 20 meters to our right-hand RPG that thankfully missed its target. The concussion wave knocked me sideways. That's when the ringing started, those 23 seconds of silence, while the world continued to explode around me. I saw Harris running in a crouch toward the overturned Humvee, medical bag clutched to his chest, Wilson providing covering fire. I saw Wright take a round to the shoulder, spinning him around before he dropped behind a small embankment. I saw all of this in complete silence, like watching a movie with the sound turned off. When my hearing came back, it was all at once. Deafening rattle of automatic weapons, the shouts of Marines calling for ammo, for medics, for air support that was still 20 minutes out. Reynolds, you hit. Collins was beside me, face streaked with dirt and sweat, mouth moving almost in sync with the words I could now hear. I'm good, I shouted back. Just lost my hearing for a minute. He nodded, then turned back to fire at the ridge. I joined him, emptying a magazine toward muzzle flashes I could barely see. Eject, reload, fire, the rhythm of combat, muscle memory, taking over when conscious thought failed. Parker's voice came over the radio, strained but professional. Wildcat 1-6, this is Dark Horse 3-3. We are taking heavy fire in the valley at grid coordinates, multiple casualties, requesting immediate air support and medevac. Over. The response was garbled, but the message was clear. Help was coming, but not soon enough. Mitchell's saw fell silent. I looked over to see him frantically clearing a jam, cursing steadily under his breath. Harrison moved to cover him, firing his M16 in disciplined bursts. How many wounded? I asked Collins, during a brief lull. At least 3 in the lead vehicle. Wilson took some shrapnel. Wright's hit in the shoulder. He paused. Matthews is alive. I saw him directing fire from behind the overturned Humvee. Relief washed through me. If Matthews was still functioning, we had a chance. The firing from the ridges intensified, concentrated now on our position. Bullets kicked up dust around us, pinged off the Humvee's armor, shattered what remained of the windows. We were pinned down, exposed, with limited options. We're too vulnerable here, Harrison shouted from his position. They've got us zeroed. As if to emphasize his point, another RPG streaked down, exploding about 30 meters behind us. Close enough to feel the heat, far enough to avoid casualties. They were walking their fire toward us, correcting with each shot. We need to move, I yelled to Collins. Next one might hit us directly. Before he could respond, Matthews was suddenly beside us, blood running down the side of his face from a cut above his eye. Despite the injury, his voice was calm, authoritative. We're too exposed here. We need to get to that drainage ditch. He pointed to a shallow depression about 50 meters ahead, closer to the eastern ridge but offering better cover than our current position. Moving meant exposing ourselves to fire from both sides. Staying meant certain death, as the insurgents zeroed in on our position. "On my mark," Matthews said, then touched the side of his helmet where I knew the sonogram was taped. "Foster, you and Mitchell lay down covering fire. Everyone else, we, move in pairs. Ready?" I wasn't ready. No one was. But we nodded anyway. 3, 2, 1, move. The next moments were a blur of adrenaline and focused terror. Mitchell's saw roared back to life, joined by Foster's rifle. Under their covering fire, we began to move in pairs toward the drainage ditch. Matthews and Parker went first, sprinting. In a low crouch, they made it without incident, immediately turning to provide covering fire for the next pair. "Wilson, Lee, go," Matthews shouted. They made it across, Wilson limping slightly from his earlier wound. "Clark, Wright, you're next." Wright's injured shoulder left him slower, more vulnerable. Clark half carried him, both somehow avoiding the bullets kicking up dirt around their feet. "Collins, Reynolds, go now." Collins nodded at me, a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Race, you there." Then we were running, legs pumping, lungs burning. The 50 meters seemed to stretch endlessly. I could hear bullets whizzing past, feel the impact as they hit the ground near my feet. My world narrowed to the drainage ditch. Ahead and Collins' ragged breathing beside me, we dove into the relative safety of the depression, immediately turning to provide covering fire for the final pair. "Foster, Mitchell, come on." Matthews called Dot. They were the most exposed, having provided covering fire for everyone else. Mitchell abandoned his saw, too heavy to run with. Foster gave one final burst from his rifle. Then they both sprinted toward us. They were halfway to the ditch when disaster struck. Mitchell went down first, hit in the leg. He fell hard, crying out, his momentum carrying him forward a few more feet before he stopped. Foster skidded to a halt, turning back toward his fallen comrade without hesitation. "Keep moving," Matthews shouted. "That's an order." But Foster ignored him, dropping to one knee beside Mitchell, already trying to drag him toward the ditch. They were exposed, vulnerable, sitting targets on the open valley floor, covering fire. Matthews bellowed, and our rifles opened up as one, pouring rounds at the ridgelines, trying to suppress the enemy fire long enough for Foster and Mitchell to reach safety. "They're not going to make it," Collins muttered beside me, his voice tight with the knowledge that we were watching our friends die in real time. I looked at the distance between us and them. 20 meters of open ground swept by enemy fire, an impossible gap. "Cover me," I said, not recognizing my own voice. Collins grabbed my arm. "Jack, no." But I was already moving, vaulting out of the drainage ditch, running low and fast toward Foster and Mitchell. I heard Collins cursing, then the steady rhythm of his rifle providing covering fire. The world narrowed to a tunnel of sound and movement. Bullets kicked up dust around me. The crack of rifles from the ridgelines, the answering fire from the Marines behind me. My own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I reached Foster and Mitchell, sliding in beside them like a baseball player stealing. "Home?" Mitchell's face was gray with pain and blood loss, a crimson stain spreading across his pant leg, where the bullet had torn through his thigh. "Can you move?" I gasped, already knowing the answer. He gritted his teeth. "Not on my own." Foster was calm, focused. "I'll take his left, you take right. On 3. We hoisted Mitchell between us, his arms over our shoulders. He was heavy, dead weight with his injured leg. We managed 5 steps toward the ditch before another burst of gunfire swept the area. Foster grunted, stumbled, but kept moving. Another 3 steps. "You hit?" I asked, seeing his grimace. "I'm good. Keep going." 2 more steps. Mitchell's breathing was labored, each movement agony for him. Foster was slowing, his steps becoming uneven. That's when I saw the blood soaking through the front of Foster's flak jacket, not from Mitchell, but from Foster himself. He'd been hit in the chest, but kept moving, kept dragging Mitchell toward safety. Foster's hit. I shouted toward the ditch. Need help. Harris was already moving, sprinting toward us with Collins providing covering fire. 10 meters from the ditch now. 8-5. Foster collapsed just 3 meters short, blood bubbling from his lips. He fell to his knees, then forward, still, trying to hold on to Mitchell. Harris reached us, immediately assessing the situation. Get Mitchell to the ditch, he ordered me. I've got Foster. With Harris's help, I dragged Mitchell the final distance to safety. As soon as we reached the ditch, Collins and Wilson pulled him in, applying a tourniquet to his leg. I turned back to see Harris struggling with Foster, whose body had gone limped out without thinking. I was back out there, helping Harris drag Foster's unresponsive form toward the ditch. We were almost there when a bullet clipped Harris's helmet, knocking him sideways. He recovered quickly, and together we pulled Foster into the relative protection of the depression. Harris immediately went to work, cutting away Foster's body armor and uniform to access the wound. But I could tell from his expression that it was too late. The bullet had pierced Foster's lung, possibly his heart. Blood frothed from his mouth with each weakening breath. "Stay with me, Benji," Harris muttered, working frantically to stem the bleeding. "Come on, kid, stay with me." Foster's eyes found mine, wide with shock and something like surprise. His lips moved, trying to form words through the blood. I leaned closer. "What is it, buddy? Did we make it?" he whispered. "Yeah, Benji, we made it. You got us here. You did good." A faint smile. Then his eyes lost focus, staring at nothing. Harris continued working, refusing to give up, but the rest of us knew. Foster was gone. Collins placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing hard. "You did everything you could, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough." There wasn't time to mourn. Even as Harris closed Foster's vacant eyes, the firefight raged on. The drainage ditch provided some cover, but we were still under heavy fire from both ridgelines. The air was thick with dust and the smell of gunpowder. Matthews crawled over to us, his face grim when he saw Foster. He placed a hand briefly on the fallen Marine's chest, a silent goodbye, then turned to the task at hand. "Parker, what's the status on air support?" Parker was hunched over his radio, one hand pressed to his ear to hear over the gunfire. 10 minutes out. Staff Sergeant, medevac will follow once the area is secure." Matthews nodded, his eyes scanning our position, assessing. "We need to hold until then. Reynolds, Collins, Eastern Ridge. Wilson, Lee, Western. Mitchell needs medical attention. Harris, stabilize for now," Harris replied, finishing a pressure bandage on Mitchell's leg. "But he needs evacuation soon." "What about the lead vehicle?" I asked. Matthews. There were 4 Marines in there. A shadow crossed his face. Lee and I checked. Carlson and Rodriguez didn't make it. Lieutenant Garcia is unconscious, might have a concussion. Jackson's tending to him behind the overturned Humvee. 2 more dead. The knowledge settled like a stone in my gut. "We've got wounded at multiple locations," Matthews continued. "Once air support arrives and suppresses those ridgelines, we'll consolidate at this position, then move the wounded to the extraction point." It was a solid plan. If we could hold out that long, Collins and I took position at the eastern edge of the ditch, setting up fields of fire that covered the most active enemy positions. The insurgents were well entrenched, using the natural rock formations as bunkers. They fired in disciplined bursts, conserving ammunition, keeping us pinned down. "I count at least 3 machine gun positions," Collins muttered, "plus a dozen or more riflemen." I nodded. They knew we were coming. This wasn't random. Intel screwed up, or someone talked. We didn't have time to dwell on it. A new barrage of fire swept our position, forcing us to duck lower. When it slackened, we returned fire, aiming for the muzzle flashes among the rocks. The minutes stretched endlessly. Parker provided regular updates on the approaching air support, each 5 minutes out feeling like an hour. Mitchell's condition worsened, his face pale and drawn with pain despite the morphine Harris had administered. Foster's body lay nearby, already covered with a poncho. I tried not to look at it, tried not to think about how just an hour ago he'd been alive, joking about his girlfriend, complaining about the heat. Now he was gone, and part of me couldn't process it, couldn't accept that someone so vital could simply cease to exist. The radio crackled to life. Dark Horse 3-3, this is Wildcat 1-6. We are 2 minutes from your position, coming from the southwest. Mark your location. Over. Parker fumbled with a smoke grenade. Wildcat 1-6 will mark with purple smoke. Over. Matthews gave the nod, and Parker pulled the pin, tossing the grenade a few meters from our position. Thick purple smoke billowed out, creating a visible marker for the approaching aircraft. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors reached us moments later. 2 Cobra attack helicopters appeared over the southwestern ridge, weapon systems tracking, searching for targets. Wildcat 1-6 has eyes on purple smoke, the radio announced, engaging enemy positions. The Cobras opened fire with their 20mm cannons, raking the ridgelines. The heavy thump of their guns was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The enemy fire slackened immediately as the insurgents sought cover from the aerial assault. Medevac is 5 minutes behind us, the pilot's voice continued. We'll maintain suppressing fire until they arrive. For the first time since the ambush began, I felt a flicker of hope. We might actually survive this. Matthews was already organizing the wounded for evacuation. Harris, Mitchell goes first. Then Garcia. Wright can walk. He'll go with them. I looked at Foster's body. What about we don't leave him, Matthews said firmly. Not even now. Collins met my eyes, a silent understanding passing between us. No matter what happened, Benjamin Benji Foster was going home. The Cobras continued their assault on the ridge lines, the heavy thump of their cannons, punctuated by the whoosh boom of rockets striking enemy positions. The insurgent fire diminished, but didn't stop entirely. Determined fighters held their ground, still sending occasional bursts in our direction. They're dug in deep, Matthews observed, watching the ridgeline through binoculars. Probably prepared. These positions days ago. Parker monitored the radio, relaying updates. QRF is mobilizing from base. ETA, 40 minutes. Medevac should be here any moment. Mitchell's condition was deteriorating. The tourniquet had stopped the bleeding, but he was going into shock. His skin clammy, breathing shallow. Harris stayed with him, checking vital signs, administering what limited care he could under combat conditions. Stay with me, Danny, Harris murmured. Chopper's almost here. Just hang on. I moved between firing positions, distributing spare magazines, checking on the wounded. Wright sat with his back against the dirt wall of the ditch, right arm immobilized by a field dressing, left hand still gripping his rifle. How you holding up? I asked. Been better, he replied with a tight smile. Been worse too. Wilson and Lee maintained steady fire at the western ridge, conserving ammunition, taking only shots they were confident would hit. We were all aware of our dwindling supplies. If the QRF didn't arrive soon, we'd be reduced to throwing rocks. The sound of the medevac helicopter reached us before we saw it, a CH-46C Knight approaching low from the south, escorted by a third Cobra. The 2 gunships already on station intensified their fire, suppressing the ridge lines to cover the transport's approach. Landing zone is hot, Parker reported. They're coming in anyway. The massive dual-rotor helicopter touched down about 100 meters south of our position. Its crew chief jumping out to direct the loading operation, door gunners scanning for threats. Mitchell and Garcia first, Matthews ordered. Harris, go with them. Wilson, Clark, provide security. Move. They lifted Mitchell onto an improvised stretcher, 2 rifles threaded through the sleeves of a blouse and carried him in a crouched run toward the waiting helicopter. Garcia, now conscious but disoriented, walked between Wilson and Clark. Harris followed with his medical bag, still monitoring Mitchell's condition. I watched them cross the open ground, expecting at any moment to see them cut down by enemy fire. But the Cobras were doing their job, keeping the insurgents suppressed. They reached the helicopter safely, loading the wounded aboard. Your turn, right? Matthews said. Reynolds, go with him. I helped Wright to his feet. Let's move. We were halfway to the helicopter when the eastern ridge erupted with renewed fire. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward the CH-46, missing by meters but close enough to make the pilot flinch. The door gunners returned fire, their .50 caliber machine guns hammering the RIDGELINE right, and I dove to the ground, then scrambled, the rest of the way in a low crawl. The crew chief pulled us aboard, shouting something I couldn't hear over the roar of the rotors and gunfire. I turned back toward the drainage ditch, where Matthews, Collins, Lee, and Parker remained along with Foster's body. They were returning fire, covering our evacuation. We need to go back for them, I shouted to the crew chief. He shook his head. Too hot. We're at capacity anyway. QRF will handle it. The pilot was already raising collective, preparing to lift. Off. I made a split-second decision and jumped back out, ignoring the crew chief's shouts. I couldn't leave them behind. Couldn't leave Collins. I sprinted back to the ditch, diving in headfirst as bullets kicked up dust around me. Reynolds, what the hell? Matthews yelled. You were supposed to evacuate. Not without you guys, I gasped. And not without Foster. A look passed between Matthews and Collins' surprise. Respect, perhaps a hint of exasperation. Then Matthews nodded once. QRF is 30 minutes out, Parker reported. Medevac is bugging out now. I watched the helicopter lift off, banking sharply south toward base, carrying our wounded to safety. At least they would make it. The Cobras continued their gun runs, but I could see they were running low on ammunition, their passes becoming more conservative. When they left, we'd be exposed again. Ammunition check, Matthews ordered. The count was grim. Between the four of us, we had less than 10 magazines, maybe 100 rounds total. Make every shot count, Matthews said. We just need to hold until QRF arrives. Collins nudged my shoulder. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen. Jumping off that helicopter. Probably both, I admitted. Thanks, he said simply. For coming back. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. In that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. Whatever happened, we would face it together. The QRF arrived with overwhelming force for Humvees mounted with .50 cal machine guns, a platoon of fresh Marines, and air support that didn't let up until every insurgent position was silent. They reached our drainage ditch 28 minutes after the medevac departed, though it felt like 28 years. By then, we were down to our last few rounds, exhausted and hollow-eyed. When the first Marines appeared over the edge of the ditch, I nearly wept with relief. Medical. Matthews called immediately. We've got a Kia. A Navy corpsman slid down beside us, taking one look at Foster's body before shaking his head. I'm sorry. Let's get him out of here. They loaded us into the Humvees. Foster's body treated with solemn respect, covered with a flag someone had brought. The ride back to base passed in silence. Collins sat beside me, our shoulders touching, neither of us speaking. There was nothing to say. The base was waiting for US medical teams for the wounded. Intelligence officers, eager for debriefing, the somber personnel who would process Foster's body for transport home. I watched them take him away and felt something break inside me. The debriefing was a blur. We recounted the ambush in clinical detail timing, positions, enemy strength. Matthews handled most of it, his voice steady despite the dried blood still caking the side of his face. When asked about Foster, he said simply, he died saving a fellow Marine, the highest praise possible. Mitchell survived, though he lost most of his right leg below the knee. Garcia had a severe concussion, but would recover. Right shoulder. Wound was clean through and through. No permanent damage. Wilson and Lee had minor injuries. The rest of us were physically unharmed. Physically. That night, no one slept. We sat in silence, cleaning weapons, writing letters, staring at nothing. Foster's empty cot was a void none of us could bear to look at, yet none of us could look away. I should have gone with him, Collins said suddenly, breaking the silence. When he went back from Mitchell, I should have been there. Then we might be burying both of you, Matthews replied, his voice gentle but firm. He made his choice, a brave one. I thought of those 23 seconds of silence after the explosion, how time had seemed to stop. Now it felt like it would. never moved forward again, like we were all frozen in that moment forever. 3 days later, we held a memorial service. Foster's boots, rifle, and helmet stood at the front of the room, his dog tags hanging from the rifle's barrel. Matthews spoke, his words simple and powerful. Collins played guitar the first time since before the Valley a haunting melody. With no words, we rotated back to the States 2 months later. The remainder of the deployment passed in a fog of routine patrols, each of us going through the motions, doing our jobs with mechanical precision. We were effective, professional, but something vital had been extinguished. We'd left it in that valley, buried it with Foster. The flight home was 18 hours of sleepless reflection. What would I say to Foster's parents? How could I explain what happened, what their son meant to us, how he died? No words seemed adequate. Landing at Camp Pendleton felt surreal. Families waited with signs and balloons, children running to fathers they barely recognized. My parents were there, my father standing straight despite his cane, my mother crying openly when she saw me. I hugged them, feeling like an imposter. They thought their son was coming home, but that person had died in the valley. Someone else stood in his place. A week later, I called Foster's parents. His mother answered, her voice tight with grief. "Mrs. Forster, this is Jack Reynolds." I served with Benji, a sharp intake of breath. "Jack, yes. Benji mentioned you in his letters. What do you say to the parents of your dead friend? What words could possibly matter?" "He saved my life," I said, finally, "and he wasn't alone at the end. I was with him." She cried then, soft sobs that broke my heart. When she could speak again, she asked the question I'd been dreading. Did he suffer? I thought of Foster's surprised expression, the blood bubbling from his lips, his final words. The truth would only cause more pain. No, I lied. It was quick. He didn't suffer. Sometimes mercy matters more than truth. After the call, I sat on my childhood bed, surrounded by remnants of a life that no longer fit trophies from high school sports. Posters of bands I no longer listened to, books I couldn't remember reading. Everything familiar, yet everything alien. The Corps gave me medals I didn't want for actions I couldn't forget. Silver, Star, for valor combate action ribbon. The acknowledgement of what we'd endured, what we'd lost, reduced to colored ribbons and metal shapes. I put them in a drawer and never looked at them again. I'm 42 now. 20 years have passed since that day in the valley. My hair is going gray at the temples, and I've got a bad knee that predicts rain better than any weatherman. The physical scars of war have mostly faded. The others never will. For years, I didn't talk about Iraq. Couldn't. The words would form in my mind, but die in my throat. I got out of the Corps after my 4 years, used the GI Bill to get a degree in engineering, got married, had kids, bought a house with a yard. All the things Foster never got to do. The nightmares came nightly, at first vivid replays of the ambush. Foster's death, the 23 seconds of silence after the explosion. Over time, they became less frequent, but no less intense. My wife learned not to touch me when I thrashed in my sleep, to call my name from a distance until I surfaced from the past. PTSD, the VA called it, gave me pills and therapy appointments. Some helped, some didn't. What helped most was finding the others. Collins was the first. He'd stayed in the Corps, made a career of it, rose to gunnery sergeant before retiring. We reconnected at Foster's grave on the 10th anniversary of his death. Neither of us had planned it. We just both showed up on the same day. Some coincidences aren't coincidental at all. "You look old," he said when he saw me. "You look worse," I replied. We laughed, then cried, then talked for hours at a diner near the cemetery. He'd married a Navy nurse, had 3 kids, still played guitar, had never formed that band we'd talked about. "Never felt right without you," he explained. Through Collins, I found Mitchell. He'd lost his leg below the knee, but gained a fierce determination, became a Paralympic athlete, won medals in swimming, married his physical therapist. When I called him, he remembered every detail of that day like it was yesterday. "I still see Foster's face," he said, "every day." coming back for me when he could have saved himself. Me too, I admitted. We found Matthews, retired as a master sergeant, now running a hardware store in Arizona. Harris, still in the Navy, serving at a military hospital. Wilson, Lee, Clark, Wright each carrying their own version of that day, each finding their own way to live with it. Every year now, we gather at Foster's grave, a quiet reunion of men bound by 23 seconds of silence in a valley half a world away. We bring beer, pour one out for Foster, tell stories about him that have softened with time. We remember him young, laughing, alive. Sometimes Foster's parents join us. They're in their 70s now, but they come when health permits. They've adopted all of us as surrogate sons. Benji's brothers, his mother calls us, and in a way deeper than blood, we are. The sound still wakes me sometimes. Not the explosion that's faded, but the silence after. That perfect, terrible silence where time stopped and stretched and changed everything. 23 seconds that divided my life into before and after. 23 seconds where I watched my best friend's mouth moving, screaming something I couldn't hear, his face splattered with someone else's blood. I've learned to live with those seconds, to carry them as part of me rather than fighting against them. They're a weight, yes, but also a gift, a reminder of what was lost and what remains. A reminder to live the life Foster couldn't. My oldest son asked me once if I was a hero in the war. I told him no, but I'd known heroes, real ones, not the kind in movies who walk away from explosions without looking back, the kind who run toward danger to save a friend, the kind who give everything without hesitation, the kind like Benjamin Benji Foster, who died in a valley outside Fallujah so others could live. Some nights, when sleep won't come, I sit on my back porch and look at the stars. I think of that valley, of Foster, of 23 seconds of silence. I think of the band we never formed, the songs we never wrote, the lives we planned but didn't all get to live, and sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear Foster's high-pitched laugh on the night breeze. I think I hear him say, "Did we make it? Yes, Benji, we made it. Because of you, we made it home."